Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into something pretty fascinating and definitely timely. It's a recent look into state-sponsored cyber espionage, specifically an attack campaign that went after a big name in cybersecurity, SentinelOne. Yeah, our source material for this deep dive, it's a collection of articles, some reports that kind of pull back the curtain on what was going on. And our mission, well, it's pretty straightforward. We want to unpack the techniques, the clever methods these attackers use, and try to figure out why target a security company. And crucially, what lessons are in this for you navigating, well, everything digital today.
Right. And what's really interesting from the sources is, like you said, this wasn't some smash and grab on SentinelOne's core systems or their software. It was more subtle, reconnaissance, yes, but also the supply chain element. It really shows how these groups, these state actors, are evolving their game.
Okay, let's unpack that evolution. Let's dive into the details the sources lay out. Who exactly were the attackers here?
The reports point towards a group they've labeled PurpleHaze.
PurpleHaze, okay.
Described as a China Nexus threat cluster. And China Nexus, that indicates suspected links, pretty strong ones apparently, to a well-known state-sponsored group, APT-15.
APT-15, right. And if you follow this space, APT-15 goes by a lot of different names. The reports list quite a few. Nylon Typhoon, Flea, Playful Taurus, Royal APT, Vixen Panda. It's a long list.
And that point right there, all those different names, it highlights a huge challenge for defenders. Different researchers, different companies, they might track parts of the same campaign but use different labels. Makes it much harder to piece together the full picture globally.
Absolutely. Connect the dots, right? Mm-hmm. So the target, SentinelOne, but as you pointed out, the sources emphasize their main systems, their software that wasn't directly breached.
Correct. Not in the traditional sense.
Instead, the focus seemed to be reconnaissance.
Right.
Probing SentinelOne's infrastructure, maybe looking at their high-value clients too, and then this really interesting angle, the supply chain attack.
Yeah, that's where it gets quite sophisticated.
So how did they operate? How did they hide? The sources mentioned this Operational Relay Box Network, an ORB network, described as dynamic infrastructure. What does that mean in practice?
Think constantly shifting IP addresses, servers, the whole setup. It's designed to mask where the attack is really coming from. Makes attribution a nightmare.
Like moving their base of operations kind of thing.
Exactly. And it's not just about hiding. It's about being agile. They can spin up new relays, switch infrastructure almost instantly if defenders start blocking them. It's, well, you said it earlier, like digital whack-a-mole, very hard to pin down.
Okay, so that's the infrastructure. What about the tools? What did they actually use to get a foot in the door or try to?
Yeah.
Sources talk about Gore Shell.
Right. Gore Shell, a Windows implant.
Written in Go, the language, and apparently it repurposes an open source tool, Reverse Fresh.
Yeah, Reverse Fresh.
So how does that work for anyone maybe not familiar?
Well, Reverse Shell basically lets an attacker set up a connection from the compromised machine back out to their command server. It flips the usual direction. And that's clever because most firewalls are much stricter about incoming connections than outgoing ones.
So it punches out from the inside.
Precisely. It bypasses those perimeter defenses. So Gore Shell uses this to create a persistent backdoor, basically. Maintain that access.
Makes sense. Okay, another piece of malware mentioned is ShadowPad.
ShadowPad, yes. That one's quite well known.
A modular backdoor platform. Sources say it's used widely by Chinese APTs. They specifically mention APT-41 as another user.
Traditionally linked very heavily with espionage activities, gathering intelligence.
Right. But here's where it gets a bit complicated, according to the reports. They note ShadowPad variants being used recently for ransomware deployment.
Yes, that's a significant point in the reporting.
And these specific ShadowPad versions, apparently obfuscated with a custom compiler called Scatterbrain, and deployed in attacks hitting vulnerabilities in checkpoint gateway devices.
And that dual-use aspect is really, well, it raises questions. Why would a group focused on espionage start using a tool associated with ransomware? The sources don't give a final answer, but you have to wonder, is it purely financial now? Is it about disruption? Or maybe is it a false flag? Trying to look like criminals to hide their state backing.
Adds another layer of complexity to understanding their motives.
Definitely. It muddies the waters.
Okay. And maybe the most notable tactic discussed, especially regarding SentinelOne, was this supply chain exploitation.
Yes, this is really key.
Instead of hitting SentinelOne head-on, they went after a third party.
Correct.
The sources identify a hardware logistics company. one that provides services to SentinelOne employees.
And this just perfectly illustrates a major trend. Attackers often look for the path of least resistance. Why bang your head against a well-defended wall when you can find a trusted partner, maybe someone with weaker defenses, and use that connection to get closer to your real target?
Leveraging that trust relationship.
Exactly. It means your security isn't just about your own walls. It's tied to the security of everyone you work with. Your weakest link, essentially.
So looking bigger picture now,
Mm-hmm.
the sources say, well, SentinelOne's core stuff wasn't compromised by this.
Despite the probing and the supply chain attempt, yes.
This same group, PurpleHaze, they were busy. They apparently targeted over 70 other organizations globally during this campaign.
70, that's a significant number.
Yeah, and across a wide range of sectors too. Manufacturing, government, finance, telecoms, research. Pretty broad.
It shows the scale of the operation.
And a common way in for many of these other attacks, exploiting known vulnerabilities, often in widely used security appliances, things people rely on.
Which underscores the importance of patching, obviously, but also shows how attackers leverage common infrastructure points. And this context is really important. The SentinelOne aspect is noteworthy because of who they are and how they were targeted via the supply chain, but it's just one part of a much larger campaign. And it fits this broader pattern we see. Cybersecurity vendors themselves are prime targets.
Right. They're on the front lines.
Absolutely. SentinelOne themselves have reported other threats too, remember? Like those North Korea-linked IT workers trying to get hired using fake identities.
Trying to get insider access that way.
Exactly. And they've also seen attention from ransomware crews, Russian actors, probably probing their products, looking for weaknesses.
So it really brings it home. The defenders are constantly being tested, constantly under attack from multiple angles. Adversaries are always looking for that crack.
It's a continuous battle.
Okay, so given all that, what were the main lessons, the key takeaways the sources pulled out for you listening?
Several key things stood out.
First, heavily emphasized, supply chain vigilance. Really understanding and monitoring who you're connected to. Not just trusting partners implicitly, but actually monitoring, segmenting those connections where possible.
Absolutely. Verify, don't just trust, and segment access.
Second point was threat intelligence sharing. SentinelOne really advocates for this sharing info in real time, both inside your own company, across different teams, and with others in the industry. Faster sharing means faster defense.
The quicker everyone knows the tactics, the quicker defenses can adapt. It's crucial.
And third, continuous review. Regularly auditing things like how you bring on new partners, your procurement process, but also your asset lists, your security policies. Basically, assume things are changing, and you need to keep checking.
Yeah, these aren't just one-off checks. It needs to be ongoing, because just securing your own perimeter isn't enough anymore. Not when attackers are actively using your trusted relationships, your supply chain, as a way in. You need that external visibility, too.
Okay, let's quickly recap then. We've dived into this PurpleHaze campaign. Identified by sources as China Nexus, tied to APT-15, we saw their use of dynamic infrastructure like ORBs to cover their tracks.
The operational relay boxes?
Their tools, including Gore Shell for that reverse SSH access, and ShadowPad with that interesting potential double life, espionage, and maybe ransomware.
Right, that ambiguity.
And crucially, that pivot, targeting the supply chain, a logistics provider, to get eyes on SentinelOne.
Yeah, and connecting that back, this whole incident, this deep dive into PurpleHaze, it really shows how adaptable and persistent these state groups are. They're constantly looking for new angles, and increasingly, as this demonstrates, that path of least resistance might be through your partners, your vendors, that whole interconnected web.
It's definitely a stark reminder, isn't it, that everyone's a target, even the security companies themselves, and that vigilance, that security posture, it really has to extend way beyond just your own network.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into, a pretty complex slice of modern cyber espionage. And here's something to maybe chew on, drawing straight from what the sources brought up. The attackers didn't breach SentinelOne's core systems here. Their success, if you want to call it that, was reconnaissance via a partner. So does this signal a shift? Does it mean that focusing your defenses outward onto that whole network of suppliers and partners is now just as critical, maybe more critical, than just hardening your own internal systems? It definitely raises a big question about where you should focus your security efforts in this totally interconnected age.